Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and today it's my pleasure to have a good friend, Dr. Sam Qurashi, with us. Sam is a writer, entrepreneur, Instagrammer, and YouTuber. He worked as a psychiatric resident in an addiction facility. Throughout that time, he had the opportunity to help over 10,000 patients. After 7 years, he walked away from his medical career, believing that there must be a more effective way to help people. He started interviewing experts that live beyond the frame of traditional psychology, but are masters of the mind in a unique way. That list includes the Iceman, the Horse Whisperer, a samurai, a cold reader, a ninja, a tea master, and a pickpocket, and the list goes on. He then started an Instagram page. On his page, he shares thoughts and concepts that can interrupt the psychological patterns that are keeping people trapped in mental loops of their own design. Sam, it's so great to have you on the show.
It's great to be here, Stefan.
So
Good to see you.
It's so good to see you, and it's so good to be seen by you. I'm wanting for our listener to really understand your origin story so that they can kind of ride that wave with you, that story arc, the story of struggle, the hero's journey, because you're in a very different place than when you started. So if you could start there, that would be, I think, a great entry to this episode.
Perfect. So, as you mentioned, I worked in a psychiatric hospital, addiction hospital, for about 7 years. During that time, I've seen over 10,000 patients, all kinds of addictions you can imagine. I lived my entire life in Saudi, studied medical school, and practiced there. And throughout that period of time, I tried to help as many patients as possible. I stumbled upon, I guess, obstacles and hurdles that made it hard for me to connect with people. One of them is we were always understaffed. And because of that, and because of the pressure, we didn't have that much time to spend time with patients. And I realized that patients benefited from the attention I offered more than the prescriptions themselves. And it got me thinking, just by sitting with a patient and listening to them, and then making a few adjustments to the way they think by kind of shifting the narrative in their life, suddenly things began to change. But it starts by listening. A lot of the patients aren't actually listened to. I actually had a conversation with Mark Goldston yesterday, and we were catching up, and he's the author of Just Listen, probably one of the best, if not the best book
on this show.
Yeah. So he was talking about the idea of, clinical empathy versus tactical empathy versus surgical empathy. And with clinical empathy, it's very transactional. It's very transitional. We're just, okay, we're ticking boxes as doctors and moving on. We don't have that much time with every patient. So we're just going through the motions instead of really listening to the patient and ask them what's going on. And I didn't have that much time, but I tried to give them as much time as I could. And over time, as I kept on doing this, I noticed that there are different issues related to the idea of just constantly prescribing medication and having that, even though it's helpful, but it doesn't really solve the problem. It's like a biochemical crutch. I would love to prescribe medication for a short period of time. Actually, I did prescribe medication for a short period of time for people that, let's say, developed substance-induced psychotic disorder, which is psychosis from drugs. And they didn't need the medication for longer than the period of time that I prescribed. But, it's constantly pushed, and we're kind of pressured by the administration to prescribe it for much, much longer than needed. And obviously a drug, and I remember in medicine, one of my pharmacology professors once said something that I've never forgotten since. He said, a drug without a side effect is a drug without an effect. And so if you have a very strong effect, there's going to be a strong side effect that you're not even aware of. And when we're using medication, especially psychiatric medication, it's important to identify, how long, or just to kind of plan, how long do you want to give it? Do you want to give it for how long do you want to give it? Do you want to give it for a very long time or a short period of time? But aiming to shorten the duration as much as possible without affecting the patient in a negative way. And I think it's easy for psychiatrists in general, when I was working at the addiction hospital, it's easy for us to just keep prescribing. I mean,
Yeah.
it just happens. So for many, many reasons, the frustration that I had with the system, the frustration I had with constantly being pharmacologically focused instead of psychologically focused in a way that actually solves the problem. Because I always wondered, when this happens, when somebody develops, let's say, depression or psychosis, yes, it's there, it's within our genes, but epigenetics really is what shifts things. And basically buttons have been pressed, and I believe buttons can be unpressed. There's always another gene to deactivate the gene that was activated. And I just wanted to explore the idea of, okay, so an external stimulation led to a cascade of situations that basically led to the biochemical shift that is now temporarily permanent. And we're giving medication for that. Is there a way to resolve it in a more conclusive way so that it's no longer an ongoing thing that people need to deal with on a regular basis for the rest of their lives? So I had a lot of questions, a lot of different thoughts about this, and I wanted to find a more definitive answer. Whether I find it or not doesn't matter. Pursuing it gets me closer, maybe gets someone else closer. Maybe I could share what I have, and maybe that could help people. And so that's what helped me make the decision to leave as a starting point. And then I walked away.
Was there a particular patient, a particular interaction that was the pivotal moment for you? You're like, okay, and now I see my path.
I don't recall that. And if I don't recall that, that either means that there is, but for some reason I'm not connecting with it. I never did, or there isn't. But one thing I can tell you is I noticed that of the 10,000 patients, this is my rough estimation, about 95% of the 10,000 came from broken homes, which I thought that was interesting. I thought it was really interesting, because what that means is there's trauma. There's a sense of separation from the people that brought them into the world. And there may be a link to betrayal. Usually when there's a separation, that might actually result in in children perceiving the situation as a form of betrayal, either by both parents or one of the parents. And that's the child. That may not be the case, and probably isn't the case. That's not what the parents intend. But that's how children would perceive it. And if that is the case, then what ends up happening is it creates this trauma that is unresolved, and that shifts their beliefs, it shifts their behaviors. That pain, that I guess that wound festers, and that pain persists. And then as they get older, they want to find a way to stop the pain. When people go into addiction, some people talk about curiosity. It's really about escape. It's an escape. It's an adaptation. Escape is a form of adaptation, but the question is adaptation to what? And it's usually an adaptation to pain, adaptation to that wound that they either didn't know exist or don't know how to resolve.
Yeah.
And so they try. The exactly. Numbing the pain, because it doesn't really solve the problem, but it is a powerful tool that needs to be acknowledged. But is it the temporary solution? No. That's why we hear about withdrawal symptoms from SSRIs, like Prozac, that may last for months and maybe even longer. Some people suffer for much, much longer. Mikhaila Peterson talked about that when she stopped taking antidepressants. And so there are withdrawal effects. There are side effects when you use them. They do help, but they don't solve the problem. The problem is within the trauma itself. So is it possible to create an external stimulation? And that was my question. Is it possible to create an external stimulation that creates a shift in this biochemical shift that already happened within us, to reverse it?
Yeah.
That was one of the questions that led me to leave and focus on that. And one more thing about this is I realized that one-to-many would be a lot more effective than one-to-one, because I can reach more people. But I wanted to learn more about the mind. And that's what got me down that rabbit hole. And that's why I started interviewing who I like to call unorthodox psychologists. people that have uncovered things that science is catching up to. Someone like Wim Hof, the Iceman. I mean, he's brilliant. Dear friend of mine. The top pickpocket in the UK, James Brown. Pickpockets have been studied by neuroscientists for the last 20 years, maybe even longer. But they've already known prior to that, and they've stumbled upon aspects about the brain through experience, through attention management, that neuroscientists are beginning to unravel. And that's why they're studying them, because the concept of shifting someone's attention is extremely important. Now, the applications would be huge. I mean, the applications would be extremely useful for any human being. And that's the reason I didn't learn pickpocketing to pickpocket. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen in the world. Maybe that would be, I'm kidding. But the idea is learning about pickpocketing is really about learning about attention management. Because if I can learn to manage attention, then that application can translate into helping someone else maintain their attention on what I'm sharing, or distract them if they're caught up in their head, to kind of get out of that, to avoid a conflict. Or maybe it's to maintain my attention and prevent anything or anyone from distracting me when I want to focus. So there are a lot of applications that come with someone like the top pickpocket in the UK. Mm-hmm. So as an example.
Yeah. So have you ever taken any like SSRIs or other types of psychotropic or psychoactive drugs? Anything to the kind of stuff that you would be prescribing, or you'd be working with your patients who had been prescribed by others? Have you ever taken those yourself?
No. I think there was a period of time in my life that I went to a psychiatrist, and that was prior to becoming one. And I bought I bought the Prozac. I had Prozac, but I didn't use it. I didn't use it.
So what stopped you?
There was an internal resistance to it, and I didn't really think of it until now that you're mentioning it. I haven't really thought about that, but as I'm thinking back to that moment, the internal resistance was, no, this is not the way. And that's not to say that it would have been wrong to take it for a short period of time, because people, I mean, at the end of the day, their doctors are doing their best. When I was a psychiatric resident, I was doing my best. And this is helpful. And I want to highlight that. This is extremely helpful. It's important to basically explore the options you have with your physician, with your psychiatrist. So I'm not saying don't take it. Of course not.
Yeah. But you also need to listen to your body. And if your body is saying no, if it's your higher self saying no, you need to listen to that as well. And of course, This is not medical advice. Consult your physician, blah, blah, blah. All disclaimers apply. And I found that muscle testing and other ways of tapping into your innate knowledge and innate wisdom, and also your higher self is really instructive and helpful. So I'm reading a book called Power versus Force. Are you familiar with that book?
Heard of the book, but haven't read it. Heard of the book.
It talks about applied kinesiology, and there's real science, hard science behind this. But the premise is simply this: that you're muscle testing to see if something shows up strong or weak. If you hold a particular drug, supplement, vitamin, whatever in your hand, and you don't even see what it is that you're holding, your body knows. How does it know? Because your higher self knows. Your higher self sees what's happening and is like responding, giving you that feedback so that you don't take it, or you take it depending on what the most benevolent outcome would be.
Absolutely. Trusting your own body. And this kind of ties into something else, but a lot of people, one of the main problems, and I remember this from one of my mentors, was talking about mental and physical illness and how that's linked to inauthenticity, not expressing the truth There's a truth that is hidden, a truth that is suppressed, a truth that we fear exposing, that suddenly creates that internal suppression and creates that internal conflict. And we start operating with incongruency. We become inauthentic. And suddenly mental and physical illnesses emerge as a way to make us realize, because whenever when something demands our attention, especially in our bodies, it means that something is at tension in our lives. And so listening to the body and listening to what's happening, different symptoms can be linked to emotional wounds that we've never dealt with. And so the body,
wounds too.
Absolutely. I mean, the emotional aspect of I think emotional component usually is really the most neglected when it comes to mental and physical health. Interestingly enough, with physical health, emotional component is neglected, when in fact, if you think about it from a physiological standpoint, generalized vasoconstriction in vessels, lowering oxygen, that comes from the emotional component. Lower oxygen. It's nevertheless, I mean, people would, when you think of trauma in and of itself, that's linked to whatever tension we hold in our bodies. And the muscle tension in the body, throughout the body, is preventing blood from flowing properly. And so that in and of itself affects, because hypoxia is in pathology, first chapter, first page, the factors of disease. The number one factor is hypoxia, when you don't have enough oxygen. We can look at it from both angles, because if the body's trying to let us know what we need to work on, that's one aspect. But the other is living in fear, living in hyperactive, hypersensitive amygdala activity unnecessarily over and over and over throughout the day is constantly exhausting our nervous system, our immune system. The constant stress could just be because of the hypersensitivity of the amygdala in and of itself. And so there's a lot there. But when it comes to, for example, in self-development, they focus on beliefs and behaviors. This is one of the issues I have with the industry, focusing on beliefs and behaviors and neglecting the third component, which is emotions. You change your belief, you change your behavior, you change your behavior, you change your belief. That's true. The question is, a lot of people struggle with that. And a lot of people, even if they make a change, the change is not lasting, and it's an ongoing battle. The question is, why is it an ongoing battle? Well, because belief and behavior are adaptations to something else that they grew out of as well. And that's emotions. If we look at behaviors as a branch, belief is the trunk. You can chop the branch, you can chop the trunk, the tree will grow back. But emotions are the root. And if you release and dissolve the emotional wound that gave birth to these beliefs and behaviors that were meant to protect you, then these beliefs and behaviors will no longer be there. It will be easy to change, and the change will be lasting, long-lasting, and they may even happen all by themselves. And all you had to do is focus on the emotional wound instead of changing. It's like I'm trying to adapt to the existence of that thorn in the sole of my foot. But whatever I do is an adaptation to its existence. But if I remove the thorn, then a lot of the adaptations that I've done for that are I don't have to change the way I walk to cope with the fact that there's that wound. I don't have to tell people not to press on it or not to, interact with me in a way that makes it pressed, or that forces it to be pressed or triggered in any way or form. I get to, yeah. So we go back to emotions.
It's kind of like a nail in your tire, and you could keep adding air to the tire, and then it slowly leaks out.
Yeah.
But it's more of a disease maintenance state than a health and wellness state. Or you could take the take the nail out, patch the tire, and that's a permanent fix.
Exactly. I mean, trigger management is triggers actually are a good example. If someone says something that bothers you, that triggers you, okay?
Yeah.
What are the different options that you'd have in terms of dealing with them? Someone said something that triggered Stephan. What would Stephan do?
I would be personally, for where I'm at now in my life,
Yeah,
I would be a detective for in regards to that trigger. What is that trigger? Why is it triggering me? What am I meant to learn from this? And how do I heal it versus avoid the situation or avoid getting triggered in the future by reducing contact with the person who triggers me.
that's one example. Everything that you said is great. The last thing you mentioned is an example of what other people, or maybe how Stephan in the past would have behaved, right?
Yeah.
You'd basically potentially cut people out of your life or distance yourself from them. That's one. And that's what a lot of people
Yeah.
would do. Or someone would threaten the person, like, if you ever do that again, you know, I will do this, that, to kind of induce fear in them so that they don't do that again. Some people would do that. Some people would be honest about how they feel and will express how they feel, which is actually a really healthy way, depending on how you do it, depending on how the other person, if the other person's actually knows how to receive emotional expression in a healthy way and doesn't judge you for it, right? And then the fourth one, which is the worst, actually, is the person does nothing and suppresses them. They just hold back. They don't do anything. They hope the person is not going to do that again. And all four have one thing in common. All four are basically trigger management. They're managing the trigger. They're basically finding ways of telling people, please don't press that trigger. I don't want to feel what I'm feeling now, and I'll do whatever it takes. And these are different ways of making sure that we manage the trigger. But the problem with trigger management is it keeps the trigger alive. And once we take responsibility and realize that their behavior has nothing to do with us, their behavior is basically it's coming from their pain, from their fear. How we feel about their behavior is our responsibility. And suddenly we take back all the control, because if we're operating in the way of please don't press the button, we're giving people way more control over us. We're waiting for them to save us instead of us releasing what we have. Because usually in relationships, people, especially in intimate relationships, but in general, they are a reflection of what we need to work on in terms of the wounds that we're still carrying until this moment. And so when it comes to something like this, emotional processing eliminates the trigger. And so if this repeats, no one's going to feel, you're not going to feel triggered. And so you have a choice of either responding to them or not. But you don't have to respond to them because you're not destabilized emotionally. Emotional processing is not about you not feeling bothered. It's about you not being triggered, i.e., emotionally destabilized, which means you can either respond, but you'll respond in a totally different way. You're not responding because you need them to stop. You're just letting them know that this is not within your value. This is a boundary, because eliminating a trigger doesn't mean people are allowed to violate your boundaries. That's the other side of it.
Do you have an example of, for you personally, an emotional wound that led to a trigger that you have managed to eliminate?
I had a lot of emotional wounds that I needed to heal. For some reason, nothing's coming up. But here's what I will tell you. My mentor was mentioning an example of that, so I'll share that. And if something else comes up, I'll let you know immediately. But yeah, nothing's coming up at this moment. But yeah, just to be clear, I had a lot of emotional wounds and therefore a lot of triggers. And I worked with the wounds to release them in order for the triggers to go away, to be dissolved as well. So an example, one of my mentors was telling me about how he used to arrive on time and people are always late, and that triggered him. And he basically, and I think a lot of people that are listening would relate to that one. And so he'd basically, he would usually suppress the emotions because he doesn't want, like, okay, they arrived, but he just keeps it in. And sometimes when he talks, he's going to sound very aggressive because there's a lot of emotions in that moment because he's been holding on to it. So he realized that, hold on, why am I being triggered? The question is, what's the emotional wound that gave birth to this trigger? It could be something unrelated to someone being late. It could be related to that specific scenario, but not with that person. It probably hasn't started with that person. It started with someone in the past.
Right.
And so
Like a caregiver who would be late for every recital or performance throughout his childhood. And that was a reminder, don't count on people who are going to be late for you.
So he may have had, he didn't tell me the emotions, but I can guess if that were the case, he would be having emotions of betrayal, abandonment, and resentment and anger and frustration. Frustration is a strong one when someone's late and you have that, so there are different emotions that are linked to that. And so he worked on them. And at the end of the day, people were still late, but it no longer triggered them, triggered him. And what we need to realize is a lot of times what we're going through, we're asking others to change. But when in fact, most of the problems really are, we're feeling it. Now, this is not victim blaming. I want to clarify that. This is not about enabling people to continue behaving, because releasing the trigger doesn't mean you can't enforce your boundaries. You absolutely must. In fact, 3 things that people struggle with on an emotional level that is affecting their mental health. Number 1, people don't express the truth about how they feel. 2, people say yes when they actually mean no. Number 3, people don't enforce their boundaries. If those 3 are resolved in the lives of people around the world, imagine the level of pressure that could have been released in people's lives, that can be released in people's lives. Because if you start enforcing your boundaries, it's not about not being triggered. It's about your boundaries not being violated. It's important to get rid of the triggers because that takes away the power that people have over you without them even knowing that they have it. Because the trigger comes from outside. It could be an internal trigger. You could remember something had happened and then you get triggered. The memory itself is a trigger. So that's one thing. The second is when you, and they're all, by the way, tied into truth, if you think about it. Enforcing your boundaries is expressing the truth about what you don't want or how you don't want to be treated. And you're suppressing it if you don't enforce your boundaries. When you say yes when you actually mean no, you're not expressing the truth about what you want and how you feel about the request. That is,
you're being inauthentic, essentially.
Exactly, which takes us back to the idea of inauthenticity that I mentioned earlier. And the third one, the truth about how you feel. Expressing the truth about how you feel is so important, but it ties into something else, which is people fear expressing the truth about how they feel, about what just happened, about what happened in the past. And the reason for that is they fear rejection. Fear is the number one cause, but there are many different types of fear. But they fear being rejected. They fear being judged, because judgment would lead to rejection in the minds of people. And that fear stops them from dissolving the emotion, and then it starts to affect their mental health. You don't have to share how you feel to someone else, by the way. You can express it on your own, but people don't do that. But if you do want to express it to someone else, it's important to clarify how you express. And it's important for people to learn how to receive as well. So if you're expressing the truth about how you feel about something, it's important for me to not judge your emotions because they're yours. They're not mine. I can't understand how you feel. I can imagine how it might feel like based on my life. but I can't truly know how you feel. And a lot of people talk about emotions as something that somebody needs to earn. So I'll give you an example in terms of physical pain and emotional pain. Okay. If someone has shoulder pain, okay, how ridiculous would it be for the person in front of them to say, no, you don't. Prove it to me. I had that. It's not that bad. You don't deserve to feel that shoulder pain. Something like that. And the list would go on and on. But that's how we deal with emotional pain of others. A lot of people would basically judge someone for feeling something, like, you don't deserve to feel that. Or, I felt that and it's not as bad as you're exaggerating.
Yeah.
The thing is, we don't know what's going on inside of them. Emotions are subjective.
Parents do this to kids all the time. They're like, you don't want that.
Yes.
What do you mean? Denying the kid's reality. Like, you don't want that? Really? Like, you know what's going on inside their heads better than they do.
Yes. And what they really need is basically to be listened to be heard, to have their emotions appreciated, acknowledged, and validated. Like, these are your emotions. You have the right to feel exactly what you feel. Now, the way you behave based on these emotions, that's a different conversation. But if you're feeling something, no one in the world has the right to basically declare whether it's deserved, whether it's earned, whether it's acceptable. No one has the right to judge how someone else feels. And the opposite is true from the person that is feeling these emotions. Never be ashamed of how you feel, because how you feel is yours and you're feeling it. It's kind of like, because when you're judged, they're inducing shame in you, and they induce the shame, you suppress the emotion. But the emotion is never something that was meant to be suppressed. The emotion is never something that was meant to feel ashamed about. And obviously that's another emotion in and of itself. We are ashamed of expressing the other emotions. So now there's another emotion that is suppressing all the other emotions. And it becomes this constant battle internally. And a lot of people are going through this right now. A lot of people are going through this. They're not expressing how they feel. They're not dissolving the emotions. The idea of thought and emotion is kind of like the chicken and the egg. I think, I feel, I think, what came before the other. And the thought is not the problem. It's the emotional charge linked to the thought. Thoughts can emerge as an adaptation to the emotions. The reason why dreams are a form of thought, it's an expression internally, mentally. And if you basically have suppressed emotions about an experience in the past, the thought while you're awake is just the mind reminding you of what you need to resolve, a conflict that is still running, that hasn't been resolved. It's a loop that hasn't closed. And if you sleep and you dream of it, it's the unconscious mind again bringing it up. We tend to suppress what is meant to be expressed because we can never untether from what we don't connect with. And we're constantly trying to avoid the thing that needs to be released. But the thing can't be released if we don't connect to it, which are emotions. A lot of people hide. Example would be addiction.
Yeah. And that shows up then in physical ailments. The issues are in the tissues.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Journaling is an example. Journaling is really powerful. However, a lot of people fear expressing how they feel because they feel that if I express it, if I write it or say it out loud, then it becomes real. The truth is, thoughts would be more dangerous in that sense. If you don't express, write, or say out loud a thought, you don't allow it. You don't feed it, which is a good thing. So if you have a negative thought and you choose not to express it, that's a good thing. If you have emotions, because thoughts aren't real until you say them out loud, until you write them down. Emotions are already real. You're feeling them. They're inside you right now. You're feeling the anger. Denying it doesn't make sense. Actually, you feed thoughts by expressing them. You feed emotions by suppressing them. And what should happen is the opposite. So more
Mm.
emotional journaling would be even more effective. But journaling in general is actually really powerful regardless, because there is an expression of the truth about what's going on. But if we want to
Mm-hmm.
if we want to get too advanced here and focused, emotional journaling is a lot more effective.
Mm. The kind of journaling I do is gratitude journaling,
Beautiful.
and the piece of that I found most effective and valuable is to um, express gratitude for the challenges and the things I didn't want.
Hmm.
Sincerely, like to, because that helps me to zoom out and see things from a bigger perspective. Like, how does this actually serve me? Because everything ultimately is for our highest and best good. We just haven't zoomed out far enough.
Narrative
That's
shifting.
my belief, at least.
Absolutely. Narrative shifting is extremely important. When we shift our narrative, suddenly something is not happening to us, it's happening for us. And one thing that one of my mentors was talking about in terms of relationships is, thanks to the person that triggered me, I'm now aware of what I need to work on. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
shifting the narrative instead of blaming them. Now that doesn't justify what they did, depending on what they did, because maybe the trigger may not be intentional, and the trigger may be something that is normal for everyone else. But for me, it's a trigger. But
Yeah.
regardless, it's my responsibility. And there's a difference between I'm responsible and it's my fault. And a lot of people avoid responsibility because they think responsibility is a burden. Responsibility is the gateway to freedom. It's the
Mm.
gateway to peace. And avoiding responsibility is maintaining the emotional mental paralysis we're in. We remain trapped because we're not taking responsibility. Whatever happens to us, we're all victims in the moment it happens to us. In the moment it happens. What happens next is we either stay victims, or we become villains, or we become heroes. A hero, and this is my definition, I wrote a quote on Instagram. A hero is a victim that decided to take responsibility. That's the shift. Because if you're still a victim, you haven't taken responsibility. And that doesn't mean that what happened to you is your fault, because we cannot control what happens to us. What we can control is what we do about it and how we respond to it. So pain may be inevitable, but suffering may be optional.
Mm.
Maintaining that pain that you've had because of what happened, that's your responsibility to get rid of it, to resolve it, to dissolve it, to allow the nervous system to reintegrate and rewire.
Yeah.
And that's our work as humans.
Mm-hmm. Well, cognitive behavioral therapy is based on uh, the model that the activating event A plus the behavior of somebody or yourself equals C, the circumstance. But then you reevaluate that, put a different pair of glasses on, see through different eyes, and you say, oh, well, actually, that behavior or that circumstance is not all there is to it, and you reevaluate. So the activating event still could trigger you to some degree, but you have this new perspective on it. And I think it's A plus B plus C plus D equals E. So you get a new experience. The E is the new experience, and then D is to um, not debate, but it's kind of like I forget what the D stands for, but you're running it through your new lens.
Yeah,
So I
the narrative shifting, that's your the new lens is because of the narrative. So you shift the narrative, suddenly your perception changes. The thing here is, if your perception changes in psychotherapy, CBT, you could provide a narrative shift, and you can provide coping mechanisms as well. So you have the combination. The thing here is, what would make it even more effective is connecting to the trauma or connecting to the situation and the emotional charge linked to it, expressing the truth about how you feel in a certain way to dissolve the emotions. Now you get rid of the poison, and then you shift the narrative. And even when it comes to an example in trauma, the negative charge is usually released. One of the ways to do that is exposure therapy. You tell the story of what happened over and over and over and over until it becomes a boring story, until there is no triggering, there is no emotional charge linked to it. Then you replace it with a narrative shift. And then once that happens, you're basically securing a new destination because there's nothing left behind. A more effective way would be expressing the truth about how you feel, and then you shift the narrative instead of telling the story. But the beauty of that is you're kind of neutralizing the effect by saying it over and over. You're expressing the truth over and over and over. You're not tackling how you feel. That may come along as you're telling the story of what happened, but you're not tackling how you feel. That would be a more effective way to address it. Express how you feel, then focus on shifting the narrative. And then the behavior will change automatically. And you can even work on the behavior. But as long as you're in pain, I can change the narrative. And like you just said, I might still be triggered, but at least I have coping mechanisms, that I have coping tools, and at least I have a narrative shift that allows me to look at things in a more empowering way. But what if we express how we feel, dissolve the emotions, and then we do that? Then you have a more holistic approach that resolves it entirely. And it just, instead of focusing on analysis, because why is very important, but when it comes to how we feel, and this is based on my experience, why we feel doesn't matter. How we feel is everything. I could talk about the story of what happened over and over in a mental attempt to make sure that it never happens again, to get rid of what's inside. Well, how about we focus on how you feel to get rid of what's inside? Then you can tell the story if you want, but it lacks the emotional charge now. So you just say it one more time to close the loop, because closing the loop is really important. Phobias happen when we keep telling the story, when we see the thing over and over, but we get to the climax of the story, the climax of the trauma, but we never finish the film. And we never finish the film because by finishing the film, we'll realize that we survived, and that closes the loop. But we never close the loop. We go back until the height of the trauma, the intensity of it. We go back again, over and over, and we never finish the film. So closure is important, but it starts with expressing how you feel to make it extremely effective.
Do you have an example from your own personal life where you were able to close that loop? Maybe it was something that bothered you for years, and then you addressed it?
Yes. There was a person in my life that, they had done something that I've held a lot of resentment towards them because of. And no matter what I did, I can change my perception, change the way I look at things, change my behavior. Something was still there. And I realized that by addressing how I feel, that shifted everything, because that dissolved the emotion. I no longer feel the resentment towards the person. Realizing that it's not about the person, it's about how I feel. Nevertheless, what they did was not acceptable, but the feeling was the crippling thing. And what everybody does is really about, I just don't want to feel what I felt. I don't want to feel that feeling ever again. I want to do whatever it takes to make sure I don't feel that again. But we don't release what's inside. And I did. I worked on, it was several things related to that person. So I worked on the different scenarios. So it wasn't just about the person. It was about scenarios linked to the person. And I worked on the emotions linked to each scenario. Now, it's not just resentment. It's important to clarify this. When you go through a process like that, it's not just about resentment. It's the most obvious one, but it's not the only one. And as you dig deeper, there's always more. So on top we have resentment. You go down, you will find anger, you will find shame, you will find frustration, you will find a sense of betrayal. I feel betrayed when I think about that, right? So betrayal has anger, resentment already within it. But betrayal is not an emotion, but nevertheless, it's a way to express, and it summarizes a cluster. But whatever you feel is what matters. A lot of people try to simplify it by saying, I feel blank. That's it. No, 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 no. We are so much more complicated than just having a single emotion linked to an experience.
Yeah. Well, even betrayal is not an emotion, it is an accusation.
To the other person, but to yourself, you experienced a betrayal from the other person. That's your feeling. That's how you feel. And if someone says, I feel betrayed, there's a chance that the other person didn't betray you. But what matters in this moment is you're honoring how you feel. You're not accusing them of something. So let me give you an example of a conversation with someone else. If someone wronged you and you had a conversation by saying, when I think about, when you said that thing last week to me, I can feel anger, or I feel anger. The statement is truthful. It becomes inauthentic when you say, you made me feel. No one makes you feel. They just behave in a way that allows you to access something within you that you feel, that is already there. And so the idea is, when I say that to someone, when I think about blank, when you said blank, which is what they said, there is no lie there and there is no accusation. They said it. I feel this, or I can feel this. I'm not accusing them. I'm not judging them. I'm simply telling them how I feel. So it's a way to make them feel safe as well. Because at the end of the day, I'm telling them, this is how I feel. I just wanted you to know. It's very different. People don't usually talk that way. People usually don't receive a message like that, but it begins to break and interrupt a pattern, because people tend to feel like, you know what, we have 4 stress responses, really: the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And what people don't realize is we do have defaults, depending on different people, different situations, or it could be a universal default. When someone is pressured, what's their default stress response in their life? Fight, that's
mine is freeze.
Freeze, that's stagnation.
Yeah.
Fight, that's aggression. Flee, that's evasion. Fawn, that's submission. And the one that can lead to resolution, interestingly enough, is fight, because it's confrontation of what you fear. But you don't have to fight. There are other ways. It's about moving towards and connect. I would say the word connect as a response, not a reaction. We don't need the 4 stress responses in our lives, but it's the thing that our nervous system goes to immediately. So.
Yeah, well, I learned something in India when I went to Oneness University in 2013, and that was to let the tiger devour you. If you're feeling something unpleasant, run to it. Feel it fully, as you were saying, and let the tiger devour you, and then it subsides.
Absolutely. We can only release what we connect to. We need to connect. Mm-hmm. And it's really, if I were to summarize this whole thing, it's really about changing our relationship to our emotions. The way we engage with our emotions is what determines the way what we believe, the way we behave, the way we perceive others. And it's really about changing the way our relationship to emotions. That's the starting point. And it starts with expressing, staying with emotions, feeling emotions, which is important. But I've noticed a lot of people, when I ask them that question, they're like, I try to sit with my emotions and I don't know what to do. I'm just sitting there in the morning thinking of that thing that happened, and I'm allowing myself to sit with the emotion and feel the emotion. Feeling it silently may not be the answer, because if you think of the 4 stress responses, that's natural. All 4 require motor stimulation. And guess what writing how you feel is? That's a motor stimulation. Guess what saying out loud how you feel? That's motor stimulation. The scream, there's scream therapy. There's anything. Why is exercise so good for us? Why is art good for us? Some people express how they feel by painting, but that's a motor stimulation. Motor stimulation is at the heart of expressing emotions. So the question is, okay, so if I'm sitting there, I'm feeling the bubbles rise as I'm going through it. I'm connecting with this thing that's hurting me silently. So the bubbles rise to the top, but they don't reach the surface. A lot of people don't even want to get there. They just want to push it down, back to the bottom of the ocean in their mind. But the people that want to get rid of it and they're sitting with their emotions and they don't know what else to do, the emotions may reach the bubbles, emotional bubbles may reach the top, but they never burst. Because bursting requires a motor stimulation. And the most effective one, the most laser focused one, is expressing the emotion you're feeling in that moment. Any activity can help, but focus on the emotions you're feeling. What are you feeling? And a simple thing is I feel, or I can feel, and keep going. And just by saying, what are you feeling right now? So I feel, what am I feeling? I feel blank. I feel angry. I feel suffocated. Good. As in good, say it. Say it. Don't be ashamed of how you feel. Don't trim down or kind of lower the percentage of it, or just kind of like minimize it by saying, I feel a bit angry. No, own it. I feel angry. It's okay. You're alone. You're expressing how you feel. We have reached a point where a lot of people around the world feel so uncomfortable expressing the truth about how they feel out loud to themselves. That's from the conditioning that's been happening as we kept on growing through our lives. Mm-hmm. If we don't start...
Yeah. Do you do this in front of a mirror, or do you just go into a quiet room, or how do you express this out loud in a safe space?
You could express it out loud to someone, or you could express it out loud to yourself, and it doesn't have to be a mirror. You could just say it out loud. Saying it out loud releases it, or writing it down. What I would recommend would be, think of something that bothers you, something that keeps on coming up, and write it down as, when I think about blank, whatever the blank is, I can feel blank. And blank would be anger or whatever the feeling you're feeling, and keep repeating that sentence. Write it down. I can feel blank. I can feel blank. I can feel blank. Whatever it is, I can feel anger. I can feel frustration. I can feel resentment. I can feel rage. I can feel fury. Whatever it is. It can be resentment or resentful. Whatever language you choose, whatever's right for you is what matters. And anger, not a bit angry, and avoid why. This is the greatest pitfall that people fall into when they are feeling something linked to the past. They will immediately go down a why. Like, why did this happen to me? Why did they do that? How could they do that? So if you say, I feel resentful because, now you're going down a rabbit hole. You're not going to finish this exercise. The key here is to focus on, I feel blank, and you keep going. You don't ask why. You don't go through the because. It doesn't matter who you feel it towards. Because you may say, I feel resentment when I think about what that person said. I feel resentment. But I'm not sure if the resentment is towards them or towards myself. It doesn't matter. What matters is you're feeling it. If we focus on the feeling and avoid the distractions, you will reach a point where you will have a list that has emotions that you did not even realize. And this is why I encourage, for starting with this, writing. Because now you're capturing emotions that you didn't even know you had. And allow yourself to go through that. One thing I would say is you can shift. You can start with I can feel. But if you start really feeling the emotions, then what's more authentic is saying I feel. It's not I can, it's now I feel. Whatever feels right, one of the two sentences. It's crystal clear because I is the ownership. Feel is the verb that connects you to what you are feeling, the emotion. No more words. That's all you need. And you keep doing this until you're done, until there's nothing else to come out. What I would recommend after that is an exaggerated breath. As follows. 5 to 7 times. I'd go for 7. what that does is it closes that simple practice. And it's something simple. This is not a practitioner, there are many different processes that are very effective, that are more powerful, but this is something simple that people can do to chip away at the emotional charge, at the emotional impact of how they felt about something. And it begins to take it away.
Very cool. Very cool. I know we're out of time, so if our listener is if we could give them a next action, I think it would relate to like why are these or what are these 700,000 followers on your Instagram or however many people are following you or supporting you on Patreon. What are they primarily getting, and why are they there to receive this content and wisdom from you? And what would be like a nugget that you'd share as a closing thought or idea for our listener?
Well, people that follow me on Instagram and people that go deeper on Patreon, what they're getting is a deeper insight into how they feel, what they believe, and how they behave, and how they can shift that. It's a way to. My quotes are basically thought provoking, but it's not thought provoking in a way. It's a very safe space. I create a very safe space on both Instagram and on Patreon to allow people to question. I shift the narrative indirectly through the Instagram page and Patreon by getting people to think differently, to look at things differently. And I gradually describe and focus a lot on emotions because that has been the most neglected thing in education. And I think children would need to learn this in schools. And if there was...
There's a great quote
Yeah.
I found on your Instagram. It's, I can't learn to recover what I've never lost.
Yeah.
This is one example of such profound wisdom that you share with your fan base and supporters. It's really profound.
I deeply appreciate that. I'll add one more, which is the right to express is not a license to abuse. I think this is an old quote that I wrote probably 2 years ago, but it's extremely important because just because we have the right to express doesn't give us a license to hurt others and abuse others. With the right to express comes the responsibility of expressing in a way that is very respectful, that is authentic, but respectful to others, that is kind to others. We don't need to create conflict through expression, especially if it's about finding the truth and it's not about being right. It's about finding the truth. It's about connecting. It's about creating a cooperation and collaboration instead of a competition and rivalry, because that will destroy us as humans. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sam. And what's your website and your Instagram and your Patreon for our listener to go deeper with?
The website is in the works, actually, but Instagram is Sam Qurashi, S-A-M for Michael, Q-U-R-A-S-H-I, one word, and Sam Qurashi as well on Patreon. You may find it as one word, or you may find it as Sam, S-A-M, and Qurashi separately as my last name, Q-U-R-A-S-H-I.
Okay. When's your website going to be done?
I would say in about 2 months.
Okay. Well, this episode will have aired after that, so you can talk about your website as if it's already completed.
Well, I'm not
So
I'm not sure if it's going to be completed by then. So, but yeah, I mean, this can be. You could still keep. Yeah, it's perfectly fine. I mean, the website is going to be promoted later on. It's okay. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. And thank you, listener. I hope you get out there and do some good in the world and feel better and feel fully and make it a great day. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.